We've been looking at scriptures that are often misunderstood or misapplied. Today we take a look at a very relevant and very hot topic. When should a Christian disobey the government? Being a follower of Christ certainly doesn't mean we should always go along with everything the government tells us to do. There are times we must obey God rather than men. Acts 5:29. So let's discuss this issue in light of Romans chapter 13. Even though we often interpret this text to mean that we should obey the laws of the land or obey the government, what it actually says is that we should be subject to or submit. Though there is often an overlap between submission and obedience, they're not the same thing. You can obey without submitting, and you can submit without obeying. Submission is about placing yourself under someone's authority and oversight. It's not merely about your action, but about your relationship to them. Submission says, you're in charge and I'm not. I will honor and respect your judgment. Take, for example, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're good examples of submission. They respected the Babylonian leaders who were over them. They were not rude, confrontational, seditious, or rebellious. They honored the king and his representatives, but they didn't always obey. They would not eat certain unclean foods, Daniel 1. They would not worship a statue, Daniel 3. Daniel would not stop praying to God, in Daniel 6. But even in their disobedience, they were submissive. They acknowledged and yielded to the king's authority to punish them and put them to death if he saw fit to do so. When the Apostle Paul told Christians under Rome's rule to submit to the governing authorities, he clarified his meaning by contrasting it with resisting in Romans 13, verse 2. The Greek word translated resist means to arrange yourself in battle against someone. It means to defiantly, even violently, oppose someone. Being subject to the governing authorities means not resisting them. It means honoring them, 1 Peter 2:17. And it may mean obeying them, but not if they tell you to violate a higher authority. Be aware this principle applies to all four areas of authority in your life, but that's a topic for another study. There is an argument I've heard many times in various ways that basically says Romans 13 doesn't apply to American Christians because of the uniqueness of our country. People say we are a representative republic. We are governed by laws and not by a king or emperor. Our government officials answer to the people. I don't want to get too deep into civics or history. I love our nation. I was actually born on the 4th of July, and I love some of the relatively unique aspects of our nation. However, we're not the first country to be a republic, have a constitution, or believe that government officials derive their right to govern from the consent of the people. If Romans 13 doesn't apply to us, then it hardly applies to anyone today. Should we do this with all of the Bible? Dismiss it because our cultural context has changed? Many feel they have the right to violently rebel against the government if a law is passed that is unconstitutional. But we have a mechanism for determining whether or not laws are constitutional. Under our system, citizens cannot just decide for themselves that a law is unconstitutional and violently oppose the government. That's not how our system works. We must appeal to the courts. We have a right, biblically and legally, to appeal to the courts and let the courts decide. Though our cultural context today is certainly different than first century Rome, our instructions to be submissive and not seditious are the same. If a law cannot be obeyed by a follower of Jesus, then we must disobey the law. but we do so respectfully and submissively, yielding to the government's right to punish us if convicted. Just as there is a difference between submission and obedience, there's also a difference between submission and allegiance. By saying be subject to the governing authorities, Paul was not saying give your allegiance to your country or your government. Paul wasn't telling Christians in Rome to be Roman patriots. A person can be a complete stranger in a nation and be subject to the governing authorities. If I take a trip to China, I would need to be subject to the Chinese authorities, but I would not be giving my allegiance to China. I would be a sojourner, a pilgrim, which of course is the way we're supposed to think of ourselves in every country. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. I find it ironic that we feel we shouldn't get too attached to this world, but feel that it's perfectly acceptable to get attached to a particular nation on the earth. Sometimes it's very difficult, if not impossible, to be a pilgrim and a patriot at the same time. I love and appreciate this country very much, but I respect the laws and am subject to the governing authorities because I'm a follower of Jesus. If I must choose between obeying God and men, I will respectfully disobey a country's laws, submitting myself to their punishment while trusting in God to vindicate me. My true citizenship is to God's kingdom. His is the greatest nation on earth. Like my brothers and sisters around the world, I am peacefully embedded in this particular country to bring about God's rule and God's reign. This is a profound and deep subject. I hope this short study based on Romans chapter 13 has helped you evaluate it. And Lord willing, we will meet again.